This is the second of the plenary panels, which by definition is one that everyone is likely to be interested in. We're just finalising a few things here, but this is one that's been put together from a diverse selection in a sense. Insofar, oh, one sec, folks. Are we okay now? Okay then, so this is quite diverse insofar as we've got three separate presentations coming together from different directions, but all with a criticality in common. And perhaps, among friends as it were, a criticality towards disability studies. I think the best thing is that we can crack on, and we want that. Yeah. Okay then. Okay, so we're going to try to keep this to 20 minutes papers as much as possible. I've asked Clara, she'll give the folks on the stage a bit of a nod. Okay, thank you.
All right, hello all of you. How are you doing?
Fantastic.
I'm glad that somebody's playing the call and response game, because as a performance studies person up here, I may be about to make you do something. Who knows? Okay, so my name is Jessica Stokes, and this paper is called Slow Reading, or Trying to Slow Read the Cancer Journals. A little different title than in the program. Bear with the changes. So, on the slide is a photo with a very dead fish on the left, which sits atop a surface where various layers of posters have been ripped and piled or placed over one another, seemingly over time. The words on the posters are not discernible except on the bottom of the frame where La Histoire can be read. Cut-ups and erasures. In front of you, if you have a paper handout that went around, or if you have opened an access copy at the bit.ly link that is up here, which I will read. So if you go to bit.ly/2xkppdt, I know they've gotten longer and longer. They're not really doing what they're supposed to do, making your URLs quite small. Is a page from the New England Journal of Medicine, published in January of 1980. It's the same year that self-described black, lesbian, mother, warrior poet Audre Lorde first published the Cancer Journals, a book where she traces her weave-back strand by bloody self-reference strand and encourages others to do the same, so they might begin to know the tyrannies they swallow day by day before they sicken and die of them. So I'm asking you on that sheet, the one that shows the sort of medical text in the very small print, or on the access copies that's much larger, but after it mentions that it's in the medical text, to circle, bold, or otherwise choose 3 words by hand or with a text editor if you did get the bit.ly link up from the medical journal that describe you in some way. So as you circle, consider the process. What does it feel like to circle each particular word? What is the relationship between the words you choose and the words you don't? What are their relationships to you? When you've picked your 3 words, if you could say one of them out loud, that would be great.
Radical.
Radical. Knowledge. Controversy. Okay. So I want you to consider what they feel like on your tongue and teeth. How are they related to your body mind? How aren't they? How do they feel like they're stretching over you or causing some kind of friction? Some academics describe their writing practice as on the mind side of our Cartesian dualism. Even academics that don't believe in Cartesian dualisms. Hopefully most of us. Recently, a colleague and fellow performance artist practitioner from UC Davis's Performance Studies program wrote on her social media program about her time in grad school. My brain, which is a part of my body, is so happy here. But academia, it's sort of brimming with these embodied processes. And I wonder about some of the ones we don't think about as often. What are our body minds doing in the process of writing that we forget to consider? Our writing processes incorporate drugs like caffeine. They incorporate postures that cause us pain, maybe in the present, or maybe we notice later. They incorporate assistive technology. They incorporate affects of complaint. How many of us have heard that brilliant colleagues say they did a horrible job writing on their sabbatical or during the summer? Did you believe them when that 4th publication came out that year? So my writing process incorporates speech-to-text software that is often a pain in the ass. I once said to Dragon, naturally speaking, I would like to write a poem. It wrote instead, I am uniquely alone. While some modes of writing more quickly cause us to think in terms of their material, embodied, and affective components, perhaps our deep and enduring loneliness, all writing involves the material, affective, and embodied. My understanding of what it means to read comes from writing poetry, particularly cut-ups and erasures. Erasures are made by covering parts of an existing document and leaving the rest behind to be read. They look like a love letter an academic might receive from the federal government in response to a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request. Cut-ups are often compared to ransom notes in their aesthetic. The author cuts away words from an existing text and places them somewhere else, arranging them to comment on the previous text or arranging them in an attempt to say something new. Erasures and cut-ups are both processes with obvious limitations. The poet can't say anything they wish. Instead, the poet is always in a relationship with the text, limited by it, and yet still capable of making it into something else. So on the back of the page in front of you, or on the 5th page of the Access text, there's this second prompt, which is to devise your own way, and you can do this now or later, to slow read this text that I'm about to read to you from Audre Lorde. What are the words you do not yet have? What do you need to say? What are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own until you will sicken and die of them, still in silence? Perhaps for some of you today, she writes, I am the face of your fears, because I am a woman, because I am black, because I am a lesbian, because I am myself a black woman, warrior poet doing my work. Come to ask you, are you doing yours? I'm asking you to slow read before I define the term or give it its history, because slow reading is about multiplicity and particularity in the text, environment, and reader. Find a way to slow read Lorde's oft-repeated questions, make an erasure poem or cut up in response as an extension of your reading. Don't cut up Lorde's text, but instead use the medical text from the front of the document to answer her. There had been a much more intricate prompt involving many medical journals and scissors and glue and pieces of cardstock, but that's when I thought I'd be doing this in one of those other smaller, cozier rooms. And I thought in that bite-sized place I might be able to afford the crafting supplies on my grad student budget. Not here, so bear with. So off to a slow start. This slow reading thing that I keep saying, it started as part of an existing community of artist and scholar practitioners at UC Davis. The aim of our project was at one point, and sometimes still is, to slow read the cancer journals through a practice centered on developing multiple embodied approaches to thinking with and accessing text. Slow reading asks us to pause with the page, to engage with the page as both object and idea, to remember ourselves as readers with bodies, to feel what spaces in the text open up when we stay with it. We each devised workshops on slow reading and workshops on devising methods for maybe one-day slow reading. We base these workshops in our embodied practices, from dance to poetry to photography to walking to rolling. Slow reading has been and will be many things, but slow reading is not skimming. exhausting Control-F to project expertise in a graduate seminar, relying on Control-F to document the exact number of times an author used a particular word. Nor is slow reading the myriad of other strategies whispered to first and second year graduate students to aid in their survival. We, as first and second year grad students whispering to one another, wanted to create methods for reading that would allow us to do more than barely survive. Slow reading is not always close. Sometimes it involves a reader's relationship to a page that has font too small to read up close or at a distance. Slow reading makes space for mondegreens and generative misreadings. Slow reading isn't just about text patterns, but instead slow reading is about the patterns text make in us. In my practice of slow reading, I work to destabilize the everyday inaccessibility typical in graduate study, even in graduate disability studies, by remembering body minds in relation to text. Instead of stacking 10 to 15 books on a seminar table on the first day of class, I want to slow down and stay with a page, a paragraph, a reaction, a muscle cramp. As I slow read, I must also account for myself as a white reader. How do power structures that I'm interpolated within and the body I bring to text impact my reading? What does it mean to consider my affects as a reader, word by word? So, Lord's reading methods. Up here, there's an image of Lord who's sitting in a wicker chair with a bookshelf behind her. She has no hair on her head and is wearing a soft-seeming sweatsuit. She smiles with one hand holding a pink greeting card and the other extended, giving a partial thumbs up. Let's cut you open right now and see what we can do about it. Wait a minute, I said. I need time to feel this thing out and see what's going on inside myself first, I said, needing some time to absorb the shock, time to assay the situation and not act out of panic. Not one of them said, I can respect that, but don't take too long about it. In a burst of light, after being diagnosed with liver cancer, Lord asked doctors for time to read her body, and they don't listen. In slow reading, I'm making no claim at my ability to repair moments like this, but I do try to listen to the Lord's words and to learn alongside Lord what it means to read. She engages in embodied-minded literacies, describing her desire to feel inside herself, to read her affects, to write herself another story. In concentrating on practices and methods created by people disenfranchised through traditional academic pedagogies, slow reading seeks to engage with what Gina B. Kim calls in Crip of Color Critique, the ability to recognize disablement and racism as inextricably entangled and to enact intellectual practices like resistance to hyperproductivity that honor disabled embodiment and history. Let's not act like the hasty doctors, and instead let's imagine, create, and feel out multiple ways of reading text. In her introduction to Letters to the Future, Black Women, Radical Writing, Dawn Martin quotes Christina Sharp, "We must become undisciplined." She describes this as the meat of the collection. Martin then asks a question this undisciplinarity might help answer for the Black women writers gathered there. How do we escape these wound messages, these trickeries of self-destruction, and enter the space of the possible with hopes that the possible might be made manifest? Contemporary Black women poets, particularly those engaged in experimental poetics, are troubling disciplinary and spatial boundaries in their work. Alexis Pauline Gumb's 2016 book, Spill, is engaged in this troubling. In the book, she undoes traditional notions of literary criticism and citational practice in poetic form while providing a loving engagement with the work of Black women theorists, Hortense Spillers, and others. M. Norbese Phillips' 2007 work, Zong, troubles the disciplines of history and law. Phillips' book is concerned with the indescribable massacre of all enslaved people aboard the Zong at the orders of the ship's captain. The text is told entirely from the words and fragments of words found in a court decision regarding the ship's insurance policy. Philip breaks apart the language of the law to tell the story that cannot be told, yet must be told, she writes. Slow reading turns to experimental writing practices in order to undiscipline our methods of reading. How do we hold space for the many ways of approaching a text? By slow reading, I work towards coalitional access while destabilizing ableist and anti-Black logics in academia. I'm a little behind on the slides. While slow reading is an embody-minded practice, slow reading is also a practice that doesn't end at the skin. So, as such, I will now write about Audre Lorde by quoting Gina B. Kim, writing about Audre Lorde by quoting critical disability studies scholar Julie Averill-Minnick. Lorde, as Minnick puts it, invites scrutiny of the social conditions that concentrate stigmatized attributes in particular populations, or in this context, the disproportionate production of cancer within racialized and economically distressed communities. For Lorde, cancer is not an individual property limited to and contained by your body's boundaries, but an extension of the state-sanctioned and extra-legal systems that seek to delimit, contain, and exploit Black life. So slow reading is a Crip methodology. Up here, there are two protesters, one crawling, one scooting as they push their way up the steps of the US Capitol. Someone above them can be seen taking their photo. Slow reading, as a Crip methodology, is informed by the history of disability activism. The Capitol crawl acted as a ramp in the direction of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Disabled activists crawled up the steps to the US Capitol just months before. Okay.
Sorry.
Am I illusionary here? No, just kidding. So disabled activists crawled up the steps to the US Capitol just months before the act was passed. Are people able to hear anything? Okay, I keep going. So in reflecting on the event, one participant recalls, some people may have thought it was undignified for people in wheelchairs to crawl in that manner, but I felt it was necessary to show the country what kinds of things people with disabilities have to face on a day-to-day basis. Activists felt each stare during and after. Slow reading demonstrates the need to account for multiplicitous body minds in designing graduate pedagogies. Graduate study doesn't have to be about climbing through a pile of books stacked on the table on the first day of class, or, again, seeming to have mastered a text by pressing Control F, the fastest. Let's change the scale. Slowly moving across the page, being learned by the text instead of learning the text, expanding a single sentence into the vast space of embody-minded epistemologies. But slow reading is not a disability simulation. So the practice of slow reading does not ask readers to imagine facing barriers to text they don't. I'm not asking non-disabled people and disabled folks to slow read, asking them to play Crip. Instead, slow reading is similar to putting a ramp on a building. It's good for wheelchair users, but also people pushing strollers, or carts full of books, or people with mobilities yet unknown. Slow reading also recognizes we are limited in the materials we have to build ramps and to create worlds. While our body minds and the literacy practices that come from them do not end at the skin, skin doesn't stretch infinitely either. I know this from the scrapes cut into my hands by my wheelchair when I forget to pack gloves. So what are the limits of slow reading? On process and the limits of archives. So Lorde has much to say about limits and language. In imagining her future and the future of others, Lorde writes, "My visions of a future I can create are honed by the lessons of my limitations. What we can make is shaped by our experiences, and so too is what we can say." Lorde goes on, "What are the words you do not yet have? What do you need to say? What are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own until you will sicken and die of them, still in silence?" People often read this passage metaphorically. In fact, feminist STS writer Stacey Alamo has taught it that way to her students before. In Bodily Natures, though, she emphasizes the passage's materiality, notwithstanding the potent metaphorical resonance of swallowing tyranny. The swallowing and the death that results is also quite literal, since it alludes to the ingestion of carcinogenic foodstuffs. This particular chapter from the Cancer Journals, which appears in many women's studies anthologies, is often read as a generalized call to refuse to be silenced. But what does it mean to read materially? What kind of relationship do you have with the text in front of you when you have had to work through a particular, possibly distant lexicon to describe yourself? How is the text you're cutting from influenced what you're able to say? Saidiya Hartman, performance studies scholar and African-American literary and cultural theorist, considers and enacts the limits of what can and cannot be read into the Atlantic slave trade. Hartman tries to remake the story of two people, two enslaved girls who are written about in the archive, but whose writings she does not have access to. She admits that in this attempt she fails, that she recreates the violence of the archive in trying to say anything about the girls. But she publishes her text anyway. She can't free the past in the present. Her ability to speak about the past at all is limited by the words of the archive. It's still present in the words she has available and in her ability to imagine the lives of the girls. Hartman writes that there's not one extant autobiographical narrative of a female captive who survived the Middle Passage. Instead of having the words to address the violence, Hartman's engagement depends upon the legal records, surgeons' journals, ledgers, ship manifests, and captain's logs, and in this regard, falters before the archive's silence and reproduces its omission. The complication of writing the stories of these two girls is that their stories cannot be recovered, freed, or excised from the archive. But Hartman tries anyway. In the meantime, in the space of the interval between too late and too early, between the no longer and not yet, our lives are co-avowed with the girls and the as of yet incomplete project of freedom. In the meantime, she writes, it is clear that her life and ours hang in the balance. What do we do in the meantime? This critical engagement with the language of the archive admits that the archive impacts what we can imagine, limits our revolutionary projects, and yet cannot be accepted as is. In trying to figure out what to do in the meantime, I have suggested you pick up some scissors or markers or cutting tools in an editing program. Remember that slow reading is not a nonviolent practice, but it is a practice that requires a sustained attention to the violences that we enact. Utilizing slow reading practices, I hope to add to Hartman's engagement with the archive by focusing on effective and embody-minded relationships to them. The language of the archive does not just exist on pages in libraries that are easier for some folks to access than others. It also exists in our body minds, in what we can swallow, in what we can feel, in what we can do. Thinking with Hartman, I hope to engage the archive in a way that does not avoid or accept its violences. Instead, slow reading practices ask readers to inhabit and unmake texts by considering the felt dimensions of their potentials and limitations. By cutting up a text, it is possible to reform and deform archival material into effectively charged places of potential. What readings can be found on the page that are attentive to our interactions as texts, with texts as body minds, as texts ourselves. It is my hope that practices of slow reading can create small gaps between words in which we might begin to imagine otherwise. Slow reading means doing our work, doing something in the meantime, trying to imagine otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just say apologies that we just lost the mic. I'm trying to get another microphone. So, Erin, what's the best way to do that? Just give us a minute. Talk amongst yourselves.
I was medically cleared 2:30 last night. Well, the States are like a little bit. Oh, you know it. You know it.
Okay? Can everyone hear me? Is that alright? I'm probably going to do my next one too, that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the difficulties I've had of recruiting people with dwarfism at associations for them, so the charities. I just want to first tell you that I use the term person with dwarfism, or people with dwarfism, because I feel that's just part of our identity if I say I have dwarfism. Other terms you can use, like dwarf, little person, don't like, short stature and restricted growth. And so if I'm using quotes from participants, I might just refer to the term they've chosen. Little person, however, I really don't like, and so I apologise to anybody from North America here, where that term is fine, but I find it very infantilising. So what I'm going to talk about today is, as you probably all know, there's been this surge in reports of historical sexual abuse in Hollywood, but also in charities, like so in the UK, something like Save the Children, I think it was. And these reports within charities have been the most shocking, as these are meant to be places that offer support, advice, and advocate for better treatment of the people they represent. They are supposedly purveyors of goodwill. Okay, so this paper demonstrates how disabled charities can also be guilty of allowing sexual assault to take place amongst its members with minimal support to the victim. This paper shows how, as a doctoral researcher, so this is quite a few years ago now, and a person with dwarfism, how attending conventions to recruit participants, I was sexually assaulted after refusing to date a man with dwarfism. And it calls for more disability research to take more consideration of the safety of the researcher. So this work is drawn from my recruitment experiences as a doctoral researcher, I've just said, sorry. It takes into account the notion of space, because my background's in geography, so this was in geographies of disability, and how it can influence people's behaviours, so how different spaces can influence our behaviours. So it explores how disability, gender and sexuality intersect within a particular space and can, in my case, affect the recruitment process, and calls for more consideration of female safety. So, just to clarify, dwarfism is usually a genetic impairment which results in profound short stature. The maximum height of someone with dwarfism is 4'10". The average height is 4 foot. The most common form of dwarfism is achondroplasia, which is what I have. So I have a disproportionate body, disproportionate limbs, but an average size torso. Whereas you can get proportionate dwarfism, where people are just very short. And it's a rare impairment. There's approximately 650,000 people with dwarfism in the world. That might sound like a lot, but it's actually really rare. So my research project, the aim, was to understand the social and spatial experiences of people with dwarfism in the built environment and public spaces, but mainly based in the UK. The methods, the participants were recruited via associations with people with dwarfism, and then later, because of this incident, through Facebook and through snowballing. I carried out 22 interviews, all dwarfs living in the UK, and again, because of this incident, they were mostly female. And I used a mixture of face-to-face and telephone interviews. Telephone interviews were just mainly due to logistics and people cancelling on me. And I also incorporate the use of visual methods in the form of photographs and 2 to 3 maps of where the participants lived. like the surrounding area, because I wanted to understand how they navigate spaces. So if I showed them a map, they would tell me, you know, I don't go down that local high street, I avoid that pub, that's where, you know, I get the most abuse, or that place there is inaccessible, so I don't use that. But I also showed them like these 6 images, and they were a mixture of, you know, it could be a local high street, it could be a supermarket, anything like that, or a pub. And I wanted them to tell me what they saw would be problematic in those spaces, or what could actually be really good. Okay, so my positionality, this was really important, as you know, in disability research. So I've got a quote there from Charlotte, because I asked one of my participants, and that's a pseudonym by the way, why she took part. And she said, sometimes non-disabled people do these things and they don't understand. People say they know how it feels, but they don't. By having someone the same as yourself means that they can understand more of what you're on about. So in both disability and feminist research, the positionality of the researcher is an important aspect of the whole project. As my research focused on dwarfism, the fact that I have dwarfism was seen as a positive part of the project. It was considered that my positionality would help to give me an insider perspective, as I've experienced various social and spatial barriers associated with my dwarfism, because that's where my project came from. So as Kitchen 2000 suggests, being researched by non-disabled researchers, disabled people worry that the researchers do not fully understand their views and experiences and thus can misinterpret them. Dwarfs are a very over-researched group, and I don't mean like in academia, such as in the social sciences, but more so in like medicine and also non-academic voyeuristic documentaries and magazines. So there's always some reality show where, you know, they want to focus on the dwarf because it's like a modern day freak show almost. They just want to do that. And I've had that coming through, you know, posts and stuff on Facebook asking, looking for dwarfs, quite creepy. So the fact that I had dwarfism, it seemed that I could do something. I was on the same level. I wasn't just looking at, oh, what does a dwarf do? How does it go shopping? You know? Quite boring. So what was overlooked were my other identities and how they could shape the research process. So according to Kramer, quote, the characteristics of the researcher with respect to the participants may create conditions for harassment, end quote. So due to being a woman with dwarfism and attending a particular space, which was this convention, proved to be that point for me. So I'm just going to look at disability and sexuality now. So disabled people are often viewed as asexual. This can make dating difficult for disabled people. So I watched something once because there was a big complaint about it, and it was about the Z-lister, like Chelsea Handler. You might have heard of her. She was on the Rosie O'Donnell show, and she has her very own dwarf who she likes to dress up. She could have just bought a chihuahua, but you know, she settled for a dwarf. And she likes to dress them up, and she goes, oh, I love to chase dwarfs. If I see them, I just want to go and grab them. And I'm like, you know, I want to carry mace with me now. But Rosie asked in a very, you know, way, and it's seriously, and goes, would you ever sleep with a dwarf? And she turned around and very seriously went, well, no, because that would be child abuse. Oh. And I'm like, unless that dwarf is under 16 or 18, whatever the legal age limit is in the US, that ain't child abuse. But, you know, why would you want to sleep with someone like her anyway? So there's also been, you know, the cultural representations of dwarfs, they carry this cultural baggage with them. So everybody's seen like the munchkins and the Oompa Loompas and stuff, and it creates this particular representation of you. Like you are the funny little being, then who wants to sleep with something that inferior? I mean, I've had that, you know, I've had like an ex-boyfriend say, oh Erin, I like you, you know, blah blah. But my friends find it funny that I'm dating a dwarf. And I'm like, they're not really good friends, are they? So that didn't last.
I've heard that. Fails to acknowledge that all of our stories are entangled and implicated. So we must all consider our own trans and disability stories. And if we find an absence of trans stories or an absence of disability stories, then we shall subject these absences to further inquiry. My prediction actually is that just as disability stories are ubiquitous, then so too are trans narratives. Some of us might simply not have engaged with them yet or told them. or even try to pluck them from our memories. While we might initially wonder why we are here, or there, whether it be disability or trans studies, in the telling of our stories, we will often find our common humanities. Thank you.